And let me show you this, and then we'll jump into the teaching for the
Well,
morning.
now I'm at least ready for some good news, some positive news, maybe something from the United States Senate.
The Senate confirmed new ambassadors to Argentina and Hungary today.
There you go. Normally after the phrase, the Senate has confirmed, you get this.
Nothing! You lose! Good day, sir!
But they did it. They did something. And Argentina and Hungary, man, that ain't nothing. Those are important countries. Argentina is one of the Western Hemisphere's largest economies, going through a debt crisis. Hungary's being governed by like a Putin demagogue type fella. These are critical posts, and I'm glad that our Senate was able to put aside its culture of partisan divisiveness, do something noble and good for this country. Let's meet our new American emissaries to the world.
Noah Mehmet is now the ambassador to Argentina.
He's been criticized for never setting foot in Argentina.
He doesn't speak Spanish.
¿Qué? ¿Dónde está his qualifications? Although I can see getting someone to represent us in Argentina who's fluent in Spanish would be very difficult. I mean, barely 2/3 of our population speak it. Well, maybe the ambassador to Hungary will redeem our selection process.
Hungarian Ambassador Colleen Bell used to be a soap opera producer. She admitted in her hearing she could not name the U.S. interests in that region.
No, okay. Well, maybe she can't name the interest in that region. She's a soap opera producer. She can help us when Hungary's Prime Minister, Viktor Orban's wife, wakes up from a 7-year coma just in time to call off her daughter's wedding to a man with amnesia, who turns out to be a woman who's pregnant with the illegitimate son of the Prime Minister's evil twin, Fernando. All this on tomorrow's All My Hungarians.
Anybody miss Jon Stewart? Well, being a U.S. ambassador to a foreign country is a tough job. Ambassadors must oversee the relationship between the United States and their host nation and manage all the drama and the complications with that. But it is an important job, too. The ambassador serves as the special representative of the U.S. government. He or she is the mouthpiece of the government, executing the will of the president in foreign lands and international organizations like the United Nations. The ambassador effectively speaks on behalf of the most powerful person on the planet. There have been some great and successful U.S. ambassadors over the years. Several presidents, I know we're kind of sick of presidents around here, but several presidents served as ambassadors, including Thomas Jefferson to France and George Herbert Walker Bush to the United Nations. Even Shirley Temple served as, you old-timers remember Shirley Temple? She served as ambassador to Czechoslovakia and Ghana. But the role of ambassador is a political appointment, which means that presidents appoint ambassadorships to friends and donors. As you saw in that video, a small firestorm erupted when President Obama appointed 2 highly unqualified people to the ambassadorships of Argentina and Hungary. Although the administration won't acknowledge this publicly, most likely these individuals received these positions because they gave significant financial contributions to the president's campaign. Now that's upsetting that presidents would appoint such unqualified people for such important work. But before we get all worked up over it, I should point out that we, the followers of Jesus, find ourselves in an even worse situation. We have been appointed as God's ambassadors to the foreign nation of earth. We speak with God's authority. And yet, we are woefully unqualified to do this work. We have no idea what we're doing. We don't speak the language. We don't know the issues. We can't even claim to have contributed that much to God's campaign. We're as unqualified as any to serve as God's representatives here on earth, but God appointed us to this position all the same. Now, why would he do such a thing? Why would he appoint such unqualified people to such an important role? And how, with our impressive lack of qualifications, are we possibly supposed to serve in this job? Well, that's what I want to talk about with you this morning. I want to talk about what it means to be an ambassador for Jesus. As Jeremy said, we're starting a new series here this morning. It's called Shout. share in the message of God's love with a world in need. This series is a study of one of our favorite chapters here at Rooftop from the Gospels, Matthew chapter 10. In Matthew chapter 10, Jesus sends his disciples out into the world to tell the world, anybody they could possibly find, about the arrival of the kingdom of God and the power of God that is available to them and the message of salvation that Jesus himself bought in his death and resurrection. As Jesus says in Matthew 10, we should shout from the rooftops everything that he whispers in our ears. So we're going to spend 5 weeks studying Matthew chapter 10. We're not even going to get to all of it. We're going to have to excise some sections just to kind of get to as much as we can. And we're going to do this because this chapter reminds us what God has called his people to do. We are called to show and spread the message of God's love as his ambassadors to the ends of the earth. As we get ready to make this move up the road to our new building, it's going to be incredibly important that we remember that. We're not moving to have access to a bigger kitchen. We're not moving because it's kind of cool to do. We're moving so that we can share the message of God's love with more people in this city and beyond. Matthew 10 gives us some very important instructions on how we are to do that and what we can expect along the way. So with that introduction, let me go ahead and read to you the opening passage in Matthew chapter 10. It's short, only verses 1 through 4, so let me share it with you. Jesus called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out impure spirits, to heal every disease and sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, who was called Peter, and his brother Andrew. James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. Philip and Bartholomew. Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector. James, son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus. Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Now, the chapter obviously goes on for a while. He gives further instructions to his disciples about what specifically they are to do and say when they head out into the world. But these opening few verses are sort of Matthew's introduction. And the introduction might seem rather simple, hardly much to preach on, you might be thinking. Matthew here writes that Jesus called his 12 disciples to him. He gives them authority to do a couple things. In particular, he gives them authority to drive out demons and heal sicknesses of every kind. And then he lists those 12 disciples, calling them apostles. He mentions them in two, presumably because he sends them out 2 by 2. There's 3 lists of disciples in the Gospels. They all appear mostly the same, with some slight differences in the names used or in the order of the disciples. But at least here in Matthew, the list is thus: Peter and Andrew, James and John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew, James and Thaddeus, and Simon and Judas. Now, all that seems very matter of fact, but already there's an incredible number of details in here which are worth discussing. For example, take the number 12. Why did Jesus choose 12 disciples? Because it was as much as he could handle? Because it was a nice Goldilocks number, not too big, not too little? Well, the number 12 is highly significant. One of the reasons Jesus came to earth, Jesus came to earth for lots of reasons. He came to die for our sins, he came to destroy the power of death, but he also came to earth to build the church. And in order to build the church, he needed a nice team of people to start with. Now, he could have picked any number of people for that team. He could have picked 40 people for that team. He could have picked 4 people for that team. He could have picked 9 people, 14 and a half people, but he chose 12 people. Why did he choose 12 people? Because 12 is a highly symbolic number. He chose 12 because it signified the 12 tribes of Israel. God's people, the Israelites, had once lived in 12 tribes, named after the 12 sons of the Israelite patriarch Jacob. These tribes defined and organized them. There was the tribe of Dan, the tribe of Naphtali, the tribe of Zebulun, the tribe of Judah, the tribe of Simeon. The Israelites were very, very proud of their 12 tribes. Sort of like we're very, very proud of our 50 states, or at least most of them. California and Texas, we kind of put up with them sometimes. But Israel was very proud of their tribes. But when Israel was taken over by their enemies, these 12 tribes were effectively destroyed. Israel still existed as a people group, but they had been scattered, and the tribes meant nothing to anybody. It was the loss of a very important national identity marker. And the Jews themselves longed for a time in the future when God would restore the 12 tribes of Israel. They actually awaited a Messiah who would specifically rebuild the tribes of Israel. So in selecting 12 disciples, Jesus is letting Israel know, I am that Messiah. I have come to restore this nation. I have come to rebuild the tribes. He's letting them know that I am here to rebuild your nation. I will rebuild it on these 12 men, these 12 tribes. And the Christian church that was built on these 12 disciples is the new Israel. So the number 12 is highly significant here. It's not just a number, but there's a lot more to say about this passage too. In fact, I think Matthew even has a point in this introduction to Matthew 10. This is not just introductory material to get us ready for the rest of the chapter. There's a point here. And the point I think Matthew is making here is this: God gives great power to not so great people. God gives great power to not so great people. That's what I think Matthew's point is here. God gives great power to not so great people. Here's what I mean. In verse 1, Matthew writes that Jesus called his disciples to himself and gave them something. What did he give them? He gave them authority. Now, the New Testament was written in Greek, and the English word authority comes from the Greek word exousia. And exousia means delegated power. It's a word used to describe the power handed over to delegates, to ambassadors, or to emissaries. The U.S. ambassador serves with the exousia, the delegated power of the president. She speaks with the power of the president. She acts with the power of the president. If she says something, it's practically like the president has himself said it. This is also implied by Matthew's use of the word apostle. Apostle comes from the Greek word apostolos. And an apostolos back in the first century wasn't a religious leader or anything. It was just a messenger. That's what the word apostle means. It means to be a messenger, but not just any old messenger. A messenger who speaks and acts on behalf of the sender. This is what ambassadors do. They have the delegated authority of their leader. They speak or act on his or her behalf. Let me give you an example. In this building renovation that we've been talking about, in this transition, I've had to delegate a lot of authority like this. We have a transition team of about 15 people or so that has been overseeing the details of the renovations and the move itself. And at our team meetings, all sorts of questions and decisions come up. What color should we paint this wall? What type of light bulbs should we use here? What type of bushes should we plant? I have opinions on practically all of those things. I am a highly opinionated man. But I know that that wouldn't be good for the team, and it's not like what I really think matters on these things as much. So I have had to delegate as much as I can, especially to leaders that I trust. For example, Stephanie Villagram, Robert's wife. She is one of our, I don't know if I have told you this, she is one of our hardest working, most reliable team members, but I bet you knew that. Yeah, absolutely. Good answer. Stephanie is one of our hardest working, most reliable team members. She is trying to decide, or she was trying to decide, what type of tables to buy for our new community center. Community center is a big room where we can have meals and banquets and receptions, and as far as tables are concerned, we have options. We could buy affordable plastic tables, or we could buy slightly more expensive wood laminate tables, or if we wanted to break the bank, we could buy expensive cherry top tables with diamond inlay and gold plating and the self-folding, self-stacking feature. That's super nice. I could have told her what to buy, but I actually trust her a lot to make this decision. So I told her, Stephanie, I give you my exousia. I delegate my exousia to you. Whatever tables you buy are the tables I would buy. When you buy these tables, I am buying these tables. Of course, if nobody likes the tables you are buying, then I had nothing to do with this decision. But I don't think that will happen. Buy your tables knowing that I have exousiaed you to buy these tables. That's how Christ has empowered his apostles. They act as his table buyers with table buying authority. Now I have to nuance this a bit, because when God gives his apostles table buying authority, that does not mean that they can buy whatever tables they want. They have to buy the tables they can imagine Jesus would buy. Jesus doesn't rubber stamp their words and decisions. I mean, unless Stephanie had a very compelling reason to buy cherry top tables with diamond inlay and gold plating, I don't think I can sign that reimbursement request. Same thing with me. The elders have empowered me to lead this church, but that doesn't mean I can do whatever I want to do, assuming that they will approve it. My job is to lead this church as I best understand the elders want me to lead this church. Same thing with the apostles. They couldn't say and do whatever they wanted and claim to be acting on behalf of Jesus. Their job was to speak and do what he told them to speak and do. As Jesus says later in Matthew 10, he says, "Whatever I whisper in your ears, shout from the rooftops." Not whatever I whisper in your ears, plus whatever other crazy stuff you come up with, shout from the rooftops. No, whatever I whisper in your ears, shout that from the rooftops. As Jesus' apostles, the 12 were empowered to do the work of God as instructed by Jesus. That's what they were empowered to do, not their will, but his. Which raises the very important question, though, of what exactly Jesus has empowered them to do. Empowered to do what? Buy tables? Well, that is a very important question. Jesus empowers his disciples to do many incredible things. Here in Matthew 10, for example, we find that he gives them authority to drive out evil spirits and heal people of sicknesses and diseases. And Jesus was an exorcist. Jesus was a healer. He certified his ministry while on earth by performing crazy, insane miracles for people that helped them. And he gives that Holy Spirit power and authority to the apostles as well. Sure enough, as we read the rest of the New Testament, we see the apostles performing the same types of miracles that Jesus did by his authority. But that's not all that Jesus empowered his disciples to do. In John chapter 20, for example, he gives them power to forgive sins. If you forgive anyone his sins, he says, they are forgiven. If you do not forgive them, they are not forgiven. Up until this point, Jesus and God were the only ones who had the authority to forgive sins. Now the disciples do. In Matthew 28, Jesus gives them authority to preach the gospel and to baptize people. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, I tell you, you go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. In Titus chapter 2, we find the disciples given authority to pastor and to shepherd their churches, as Paul tells Titus. These then are the things you should teach, encourage, and rebuke with all authority. This is great authority Jesus gives his apostles. Power to heal, to drive out demons, to preach and to baptize, to encourage, to rebuke, to forgive. Jesus gives his disciples great power and authority. But here's the thing. He doesn't just give his disciples great authority. He gives that same authority to all his people, even us. Inasmuch as we are representing Jesus well, we all do his work with the authority that he gave us. There's actually a lot of people in the church today who think that the authority of Christ died out with the apostles. In other words, Jesus delegated his authority to them, but that's as far as it went, and the rest of us are on our own. Now, this is actually a big, complicated biblical debate, and I don't mean to respond simplistically. But I personally find no reason to conclude that. I see no reason to think that you and I, as followers of Jesus, though we are removed by 2,000 years, I see no reason to conclude that you and I, as followers of Jesus, have not been as empowered by Jesus as the original disciples were. I see no reason to think that when Jesus sends his disciples out into the world as ambassadors, that he isn't also sending us with the authority to heal and forgive, to preach and to save. Really, though? Us? Us with all our messed up, broken, confused lives? Us with all our fears and insecurities and tendencies? Us with our impressive lack of qualifications? Us? Yes, us. And this brings me to the second part of what I think Matthew's point is. I said Matthew's point here is that God gives great power to not so great people. And I think that's his point because when I see this list of disciples, that's what I see. A whole bunch of not so great people. I mean, do you know anything about these guys, these disciples? Peter? Peter, the guy who was always mouthing off to Jesus or disagreeing with Jesus and abandoned Jesus on the most important night of his life? Peter? Or Matthew, the tax collector? You know what tax collectors did? You know how they made their money? They stole from their own people. Or James and John? James and John were hotheads. James and John had such tempers that Jesus renamed them the sons of thunder. They entered a town and he said, hey, guys, you want to blow this town up too? I know that's what you like to do. Or Thaddeus and Simon the Zealot and Bartholomew? Do you know anything about them? Neither do I, because they didn't do anything worthy to mention in the Gospels. And last but not least, Judas Iscariot. Judas Iscariot, who Matthew is very clear betrayed Jesus. And Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Yeah, that's the guy that Jesus gave divine power to. Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Now, why would Matthew possibly include the names of such failures as the ones to whom Jesus gave the authority of heaven? Why would Matthew include their names? Because this is his point. Jesus gives great power to not so great people, people like Simon and James and Andrew and Judas. Now, why would God do this? Why would he empower such nincompoops? For lots of reasons. For starters, he wants to make absolutely clear that it is God who is working through these nincompoops. He doesn't choose highly competent people because it might be less obvious that God was active and working in their lives. He chooses people who are incompetent and failures so that God's power might be more gloriously displayed. As Paul writes in Corinthians, it is through the foolish things of the world that God demonstrates his wisdom. God chooses losers so that his victory might be more obvious. But also, in choosing these 12 nincompoops, I think he wanted to give hope to nincompoops like us. If Jesus can call and use thieves and hotheads and betrayers and fraidy cats like these 12 guys to change the world, you better believe that he can use and empower us. Jesus gives great power to not so great people, including you and I. But the power and the authority Jesus gives us means nothing unless we exercise it. We still have to do something with it. What's left is for us to use that power. What's left is for us to serve as the ambassadors empowered by Jesus that we are. One of the reasons why I personally don't think we see more exorcisms and healings in the church today is because we don't use the power Jesus has given us as his ambassadors. One of the reasons I believe we don't see more changed lives in the church today is because we don't encourage and rebuke with the authority of Jesus. One of the reasons why I think there's so many of us who walk around with such guilt and shame is because we don't use the authority that Jesus has given us to really genuinely forgive one another. We don't know who we are. You are not just some random person, random Christian person who wandered into church this morning. You are an empowered apostle of the Lord Jesus Christ, sent with God's authority to tell people about Jesus, to pray for their healing and lead them towards heaven. Use that authority. Use that power. This can be hard to accept, I know, that we are the chosen and empowered messengers of Jesus. We don't always feel like we are. I remember wrestling with this thought many years ago myself. Many years ago, I took a hike out in Castlewood State Park out in West County. You live out there, by the way, don't you? Out in Castlewood, out by the Merrimack River. This church was going through a rather rough patch that you actually might remember. We had just lost an associate pastor, and a whole bunch of people were upset and confused and mad about it. I felt terrible about it. I needed to get away for the day, so I took my Bible with me and just hiked to the hills of Castlewood, and every now and then I would find a rock on the path and sit down and just read a chapter from the Gospels. And as I sat on my many rocks along the path and read these stories from the Gospels, I started getting insanely jealous. I mean, I happened, for example, upon the story of Jesus selecting the 12 disciples. These guys, Peter, James, John, Matthew, etc., all those guys. I mean, they got to walk around with Jesus. They got to ask him questions. They got to hang out with him after dinner. They got to learn from his example. They got to study his character up close. They knew who they were. Jesus had looked them in the eyes, pointed his finger at them, and told them what he wanted them to do. There was never any doubt that Jesus had selected them and empowered them to do his work. He gave them his authority, and he told them to use it. I wanted that. This intimacy with and calling by God was in stark contrast, though, to the lonely, uncertain work I felt I was doing at the time. I mean, Jesus is long gone, having ascended to heaven centuries ago. I had no one to lead me, no one to guide me personally as the disciples had. I walked around in life much of the time feeling like I was kind of guessing about God's plan for my life. Did he want me to be a pastor? It wasn't always very clear, especially when I kept making such terrible mistakes. I mean, I decided to become a Christian and a pastor in college, but it wasn't because Jesus appeared to me in my bedroom or anything. It was just because it kind of felt right. But it also feels right to eat donuts, so I don't know what kind of standard that means. So really, at that particular moment in Castlewood, I actually did not know anymore if God had chosen me. I didn't know if I had what it takes. I didn't know if Jesus would have called me back then if I had been hanging around. If I was hanging around by the lake with Peter and Andrew and James and John, and Jesus was like picking out the crew, hey, Peter, James, John, yeah, Andrew, and yeah, you, Matt Hernan, with the hat, and the weird goatee, yeah, you. Would he have picked me? Would he have chosen me? I don't know. So I actually put it to him. Right there on the hills of Castlewood, I asked God out loud with my Bible in hand. I asked him, God, I hesitate to ask this question, but would you have chosen me? Would you have chosen me? Now, I really did not expect him to answer. It was more of a desperate talking out loud prayer, if you know what those are like. But he actually did. Immediately to my question, would you have chosen me, a voice came back and said, Matt, I did. Would you have chosen me? Matt, I did. Now, God speaks to me very rarely, and I'm deeply skeptical of voices from the sky. You know me. But you got to believe me. This is undeniable. I mean, I heard an answer to my question, would you have chosen me? Matt, I did, the voice said. And the voice answered in such a surprising and even creative way that I can only think it was genuine. I asked God if he would have chosen me, and God said that he did. He changed the tense, if you care about this sort of thing. I asked God in the conditional perfect tense, and he answered in the simple past tense. I asked God, would you have chosen me? He said that he did. I did choose you. I chose you as much as I chose Peter. I chose you as much as I chose Andrew. I chose you as much as I chose John, James, and Levi. It's not that I would have chosen you, it's that I did. I actually chose you. I chose you to start this church. I chose you to serve this city. I chose you to suffer with your beleaguered congregation. I chose you to do my work and be empowered to do it well. It's not that I would have chosen you, it's that I did. And he chose you too. It's not that he would have, it's that he did. He has chosen, called, and empowered you to lead, to serve, and to share. He calls you by name. Your name is hidden. Your embarrassing name is hidden in that list of 12. It's not 12 anymore, it's 12 billion. Despite your sin and terrible choices, your unimpressive qualifications, you got the appointment. You are a crucial member of the reformed Israel sent out with the authority of Jesus to do his work. You, if you can believe this, are his inglorious ambassador. Speaking and serving on his behalf, God gives great power to not so great people like Peter, Andrew, Matthew, you, and me. You have been given the authority of Jesus Christ to pray, to serve, to forgive, to preach, to baptize, to heal. Use your power.